How we doing, guys? So following on from the last video that I popped online of the 4 Technics turntables that were recently rescued by one of my customers from a nightclub, 2 1200s and 2 1210s, and while I'm stripping down one of the 1200s, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to do another video. So if you'll briefly remember me saying on the last one that one of the 1200s was actually an earlier model, this is the turntable, and I thought I'll show you a few of the differences while I've got the back of the deck off and just run through a few bits with you. So this is a 1983 SL-1210, so SL-1200 Mark II. Now, these can be a bit of a pain in the backside, but there are a couple of bits on here that are pretty ingenious in terms of simple maintenance. So one of the first things I want to talk about with this is the rubber base itself. Now, compared to the usual versions that you're probably used to seeing if you ever have taken one of these bases apart, the first thing you'll notice is that the circular section on the rear corner for underneath the tone arm is much bigger. And I'm talking, you can get your fist in there, right? It's huge. The idea behind this, when you lift this and turn it upside down, is the bottom of the tone arm itself with the plate is all open, which makes this much better for changing over the RCA cables. So if you're in a club environment or your RCA cable decides to die at any given moment, if it's years and years old, like this 1983 model, you can simply just unscrew the 2 screws on the top here for the supporting bracket for the cable connector. Remove these screws. There's meant to be 4, but there's 3 of them on here, 1 of them's missing. So remove all these screws and lift the entire plate up. Desolder the old cable, change the PCB while you're in there, and obviously rewire everything, plate back on, and you haven't even got to take the base of the deck apart. That's probably the only good thing going for this model of turntable for this year, the 1983. So the earlier models, that was brilliant, because you could simply get this in, same day service for a customer while they wait. Very straightforward, very simple, and cheaper as well, because you haven't got to go around the whole rigmarole of taking things apart and then cleaning the inside of the rubber base like I do, and then the feet. It's never ending. But something like this, very simple and easy to do. Change the PCB and the cable, you're done, and the grounding cable if you really want to. That's really the only good thing going for this though. So if you look at this, you'll see there is a difference if you're used to seeing these bases on different videos or your own turntables. So this, obviously, this whole cutout is larger for the reasons I've already stated. You've also got, if you look very carefully, there's deeper holes here all along the turntable. And what you have, I'll show you this, is these spacers. And they actually sit, these particular ones, there's long and short spaces. You've got longer spaces that go in the corners instead of having just screws that go down. So you've got to pull them out at the same time. You've got these going all the way around the outside of the deck and around the inner section. There's a few as well. So you should have 3 here, 1 here, another 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 1 there. The rest of these are the same screws that you're probably used to seeing. If I move across here, but what you have got with these smaller screws, instead of having them already set in place, that's what they look like. Everything comes apart. Everything. You have to be very careful when removing them, not to lose anything. Obviously not to remove the spaces. You can obviously retrofit different screw sizes to fit. You can do that. You can even install the newer screw kits for these. It will do the job. But to keep things original, it's good to keep everything you take out, neatly lay them out. Or if you have like storage tubs and things or little storage containers, just correctly label each one. So you can have foot screws for the corners. So you can say corner screws with the spacers, take them out, pop them in. Outside support screws, the longer screws. These come with spacers too. So take them out, pop them in another container. Inside spacers and screws, another container. Then you've got the actual main circular base section, take them out, container with the washers that go underneath. That's that done. Bit of a pain because there's a lot more, it's a little bit more time intrusive than what you do with any other model. You know, take the screws out, job done, everything's all done. But this is where things get a little bit of a pain. So the other thing with this particular early model, this 83 model, is this. And you'll notice how I had to struggle a little bit turning that round. This particular model, or these models of this era, had the weighted section moulded into the rubber base, which in one way is good because there's not another section to lift off. And a lot of these models, as you probably realise if you look at them, when you pop the rubber base back on, sometimes you get certain edges that protrude around the underneath of the plinth, and they move forward, they bend out of shape, and there's not a great deal you can actually do to get them back to the original shape. And sometimes out of factory, I found when I used to sell these brand new, you'd have slight indentations on the rubber. With these, you don't get that because the whole thing is molded and it's so heavy and so heavy duty, it's not going to go out of shape. So that's one good thing going for this. The only problem is, if you can judge from the state of this, when you've left this for a while, you leave it in a club environment, or you've just never cleaned them and you've owned them for years, they can be a bit of a pain to get off the deck. Because if you look over here, you can see remnants here of obviously where it was stuck down. But this was a royal pain because, one, it's heavier because you haven't just got a rubber section, then you unscrew the weighted section. It's all in one. So you have to be very careful when removing this. Sometimes a little bit of heat in certain areas is a good idea, just to sort of try and loosen things up. You can't really use penetrant, I suppose you can use penetrant oil around the central section to try and give way a little bit and let it sit, but you know, just give it a little bit of heat and lift up the corners, it will give, but that can be a bit of a pain. So yeah, the weighted section on here is actually integrated, molded into the rubberized base itself, which is pretty cool, to be fair, for an older model. You also got separate recesses here for the cables, for the wiring harness, for the pitch, and everything all neatly goes in its own space. Moving on to the turntable itself, looking from the back, you wouldn't really notice much of a difference, would you, in terms of the actual plinth itself. So if we look over at the operation base, which actually is what it's actually meant to be known as, but if you probably most known as this an on and off assembly, but it's an operation base. So what you've got here is the main harness here that goes into the switch for the on-off, to the on-off switch itself with the stem. This is the model I said about where if you take the plastic cap off, it doesn't snap like this one has. If you take the plastic cap off, the whole stem will fall through the deck. So you've got the E-clip here as standard with the, obviously the rotary cog here as well. But the whole thing lifts off with the ball bearing and the spring underneath, and it flies inside your deck, and you'll never turn the turntable back on unless you take the base off. So where I was getting at with this model, as you can see with all of these spaces, there's plenty of these, and the fact that the weighted section is molded into the base, it's not a 5-minute job to get into this deck just to pop the stem, the ball bearing and the spring back in to put a new on-off switch on. Because as you can see here, in the on position, you see it activate the switch. Obviously, if the cog's not there, it's going to stay permanently turned off. I used to get quite a lot of these come through where people have actually cable tied or sandwich bag tied the switch on permanently when they actually have got the on-off switch gone, and they've got the actual the switch itself with the wiring harness underneath the plinth sticking out because they can't be bothered to put a new stem on. I've seen all sorts over the years, but yeah, that's what happens if you take the cap off, because like I said before, it's round. The entire stem itself is round and not a half moon shape. And the other versions have an E-clip that sit underneath the on-off switch cap itself on top of the stem. So the stem cannot fall through the shaft of the on-off switch tower. This model can. So you've got to be very, very careful. So don't take it off, guys. If it's starting to spin around, or you know the on-off cap's spinning around and it's getting quite loose, then it's the time to think, go to this extent, take it out. You haven't even got to remove the E-clip. Normally just lift the thing out when you've got the on-off switch off. Take it out. But then take the E-clip off with the cog, take all that off, so you've got the stem and the on-off switch, pop a little bit of adhesive underneath the cap for the on-off switch, pop it back on the stem to get it nice and straight, and away you go. It's not going to come off again, but that's the explanation there. These switches again here, so you've got the soldering points for the pads here for the LEDs. If you look on the far corners, you've got the markers there for the anode and cathode for the LEDs. So you can see this is in need of a lot of love. It's going to be cleaned up and in worst case scenario replaced, but LEDs are here and here. So your negatives and positives there and there. You've then got the physical tactile switch solder points here as well. You tend to find that there's rubberized areas on top of the switches on these older models. If you change over the tactile switches, like a lot of people have done over the years that I've dealt with, don't put the rubberized sections on top of the switches, the switches don't simply work. Just stay flush and nothing happens. That's that. Moving over to the pop-up assembly, this is the one that wasn't working. I think we can get an understanding here as to why it wasn't working. It's horrific. So it needs a good strip down, a clean. and get all this nasty rust and rave goo off of this particular unit. Then we can change all the wiring harness, replace the switch as well, and get that back up to fully working order. The pitch control. Remember I said about there was a pitch control PCB that was required? This particular one is exactly what I was talking about. So if you're used to seeing any of these on any other videos, you'll see that modern pitch control units have 4 legs on the top of the units. That's actually, the screws are off of it. You have 4 solder points on top and bottom for the slider. Okay, you got the LED section here. That's the potentiometer. These are a lot wider as well. And obviously you've got the wiring harness here too. So the slider itself is different, completely different in terms of the way that it solders on, including the legs here for the housing as well. So this PCB needs to be changed. Now, if you look carefully on this, I don't know if you could see this from here. So you've got a shader cloth on the plinth, but you've also got a rubberized cloth inside the slider itself. Remember I said about it was sticky in certain areas? This is exactly why. So if you get any nasty rave goo inside the slider, it's going to firm things up. But if the rubber over years starts to harden or perish on different areas, it's going to be harder and firmer to move on certain parts more than other. So this particular one is stiff here, as you can see. When you put pressure on, move it here, it loosens off. So it's literally loose in the middle and stiff as hell there. And that would be why. So best advice if you do have an early model like this is simply just to replace the slider. That's going to go in the bin or go back to my customer. It's not going to be good to man nor beast. So you've also got separate little supports like this, for an example, which you've got a screw there with basically a cable support tie that actually hand tightens around the cable. You just loosen that off like so, and the whole thing can be removed. So the idea is when you put the new slider back in, you could just twizzle that back round. Tends to come off anyway, or they snap after a couple of turns. But it's a nice idea. But as your old slider. But again, the wiring harness is no different to anything else. The PCB is a different design. Top plate's identical, just a different colour. Potentiometer's a wider potentiometer. But yeah, so we take that out, pop a new one in. Slider units are available from DJ Spares for those that are wondering where I get them from. So DJ Spares, fantastic. Look on eBay, look on Facebook, you'll find them. Brilliant. So that's that. That can come straight out anyway. And yeah, apart from that, there's not really much of a difference. So the actual deck itself internals, I'm not going to start spinning it around and showing you that side of it, but the transformer is slightly different in design. The way the mains cable is routed is a different design. It goes in front of the transformer and not the back. And there is a little bit more that has to be looked at, especially on an older unit like this. So as you can imagine, over periods of time, you've got things like capacitors that can bow, they change shape, coming very, very close to the end of their life. And in reality, they more than likely are. They're good for a set amount of thousands of hours. So depending on what they've used and what they've put in at the time, they're going to be past their service point. This is no different. That would have 100% gone past its service standard point. But as with any of these decks, they're built like tanks. They just work. The only time people tend to have these serviced is if they've had them for years and go, do you know what? Never had it done. Let's get them stripped down and, back up to standard. Or the other side of it is get them serviced when problems arise. This, at some point, will have problems. Something will happen. Whether it's the lamp that blows, the pitch, like on this particular version here, cables which have been changed at some point in their life. It's all different things that can happen. Issues where platter starts to stutter, pitch accuracy issues, torque issues, turn the deck on, flickering LEDs, bridge rectifier, all different things that can happen. So it's a good idea if you've got an earlier model to have it serviced. I mean, this is an 83, guys. It's not exactly 5 years old, is it? This is an old turntable, but it really is testament to what Panasonic Technics did back in the days, in the early 80s, that things are still running now. And I doubt, if you compare this to, say, for an example, the Mark 7s, even though all the earlier issues that I found with them, I doubt you're going to have them running as long as what this 1983 turntable has done and managed to do over the years. So I don't know why it's turned me around for. But yeah, so it is a testament to Technics. Done a fantastic job with these. And it just goes to show the build quality from the Mark II, the M3D, the Mark V, even the M5G, Mark VI, etc., and the Mark IV. They're all fantastic. It's all different flavours for what you actually want to do with and what you want to achieve. Still going strong, this one. Still spinning around. Yes, it's got damaged bearings on the arms. Yes, the pitch control needs some love. It needs replacing. But these, apart from that, it still works. And you know, as long as nothing major happens with them, if this was in a club, you probably wouldn't even give it a look in. Me, it needs to be... Me, I'd be getting it serviced. Simple as that. And that's exactly what this is here for. So we're stripping it down, getting everything out, clean the plinth, get everything all nice and clean. And the next step's going to be lightly key over the plinth, and then... give it a good smoothing, and then we're going to be vinyl wrapping this as well. Same thing goes with the other 1200 Mark II, because these are going to be used for higher turntables, so they're going to look really nice with some new vinyl wrap, just to give them a bit of a refresh. And there we go, guys. I thought I'd show you that while I'm stripping it down. Not the most exciting a video, but if you haven't seen these before, it's a good thing to show you. The other thing as well, before I do go, is the back sockets for the dust covers. Now, the earlier models, as you can see here, they're flat. They're a lot flatter. The actual mountings for the dust covers, they're not as wide as you can clearly see. So they're actually like a sleeve that goes inside the back of the sockets. These can be retrofitted to work with newer versions, but they are different. So depending on what you do, if you're wanting to change them to more newer style dust covers, if you've got new style dust covers and the old ones are damaged, for an example, you could change the sockets, I suppose, to still use these to keep it original. Or you can just change these over and buy yourself some newer sockets with new screws, etc. They're still going to go on. But everything is all, as you can see in here, moulded in place. You can unscrew, you can take the back plate off and do what you normally do, but it's a little bit more involved than it would be with the more modernised versions of this deck. That's basically that, guys. We're not going to delve too far into it. I thought I'd give you an overview. It's probably about 20 minutes, something like that. Yeah, as always, keep your eyes peeled on the page. More videos are coming. Now I'm getting back into the swing of things now, just taking videos before I start doing any work. So keep your eyes peeled, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.